Lincolnshire, England's second largest county, and quite possibly its flattest. One of the quietest and most overlooked corners of Britain. To me, it's home, though it's a place I've never truly known. I was born here, in North Lincolnshire, though I've spent less than half of my life in the county. Upon reaching adulthood, I left for good, and soon I'll leave Europe altogether, to explore the wider world. But I've come to realise something. Lincolnshire feels almost as unfamiliar to me as it does to most folk in Britain. Only recently did I begin to discover just how much has happened here. Rebellions, floods, invasions, and even flirtations with early rock and roll. Beneath its flatness, Lincolnshire holds surprising depth. So I've come back, to uncover my roots, my history, and to explore my ties to these English lowlands. I've bought a bicycle, and I'm spending 2 weeks riding around the county, meeting locals, hearing their tales,
It's not combed my hair, grown it.
and getting a feel for the land. I'm setting off from my birthplace, the industrial town of Scunthorpe, heading north towards the River Humber. For most of history, it's been Lincolnshire's natural northern border, though in the 1970s, North Lincolnshire was carved away to join the ephemeral county of Humberside. As a child, that change left me confused about where I was actually from. So starting here feels like the right place to begin this journey of identity.
The Humber Bridge was a big impact on this northern part of transport through the area, really, linking the north and south banks of the Humber.
It linked to places that had never been linked. Even different tribes, Brigantes in the north, the Corotari in the south, and their histories are different. I can remember not long after I moved up here, a wag said, "Oh yeah, Humber Bridge, links Nout with Nout." Lincolnshire people have a huge sense of history, and Yorkshire people have a huge sense of history, and they're different histories. And to try and lump them together and call them something else meant that you had revolution both sides of the Humber.
While the experiment of Humberside was clearly an aberration, some in the north of the county still feel bound to Yorkshire.
There's a lot of crossover between South Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire. We just didn't quite make it as Yorkshiremen.
Next, I arrived at the Isle of Axholme, the only place of Lincolnshire that lies beyond the River Trent. This low-lying marshland basin has fomented irrigation challenges for thousands of years.
I think if you mention the name Isle of Axholme, to most people in the UK, they'd probably not work out where that was. If you go back to the Ice Age, this whole area was underwater.
Long ago, Dutch workers and settlers were invited here, bringing with them centuries of experience in land and water management. In the 1620s, Cornelius Vermauden led a large-scale drainage project to reclaim the flooded land that had been lost due to bad agricultural practice. Parts of the reclaimed land were given to Vermuyden, who shared it out between his Dutch colleagues and their families who settled in the area.
Of course, most people talk about the Dutch drainage during the 17th century when Cornelius Vermauden signed a contract with Charles I to drain the area to improve the land to make it more suitable for agriculture. But in reality, it was really just changing from a living based on that wetland landscape to a more pastoral based agriculture. Disputes between the incomers, the Dutch who came in with Cornelius Vermauden, and the locals who were up in arms against this work. His base was at Sandtoft, and that's where he based his people. And it was burnt down a couple of times. They were foreigners, they didn't know who they were. Originally it was violence against the manpower that were digging the new drains, but it then became to sort of violence against the settlers who came in.
It hasn't taken me long to discover that it's impossible to explore Lincolnshire without stumbling over relics of a deep connection to the Royal Air Force. The county's vast open skies, sparse population, and flat landscapes made it the perfect location for airfields, so much so that during World War II it was known as Bomber County. Over 50 bases once covered the landscape, and the roar of Lancasters and Spitfires were once a part of its soundscape.
I was brought up with RAF planes, Vulcan flying over, so that's why in a way Lincoln's called the RAF county, because there were so many that you can look up in the sky and see a Spitfire, Hurricane, or bombers flying around.
Nowadays, most of these airfields have been decommissioned and serve a wide number of different functions.
Sometimes with the sites, a lot of it doesn't really have a purpose because it was built for the purpose of war. And they were built quickly. They're not necessarily built very well. There isn't a national strategy for the decommissioning of military sites, with the result that we have an alphabet soup, really, of what you've got.
A lot of the buildings stood empty for a while. They were just used for farmers' convenience, for storing potato boxes and, agricultural equipment and stuff like that. I live in a bungalow. It was an ex-RAF building. When I discovered this place, it had been vacated 5 years earlier, so it needed quite a lot of work to do. It was a semi-detached, what was essentially just a sort of an officer's mess, as it were.
I happened over Scampton Air Base, a place that has caused much controversy in recent years.
What they were planning to do at Scampton was not right. It was earmarked by the previous government for asylum seekers. That was very controversial. And the current government stopped that because they were basically going to put them in a prison. And that's wrong. These are people seeking refuge. But there's a bigger story and a bigger discussion about, well, what do you do then?
Lincoln is the only city in Lincolnshire. It came to existence as a Celtic settlement, shaped by successive waves of conquerors over the millennia. It has been a Roman stronghold, Viking trading post, and a Norman seat of power. Its remarkable Gothic cathedral was built in the 11th century, but soon demolished by an earthquake. Once rebuilt in the 12th century, it stole the title of the world's tallest building, and in my opinion, the most beautiful, from the Great Pyramids of Giza, defending it for over 200 years. Today, it still overlooks the surrounding lands, safeguarding one of only 4 surviving original copies of the Magna Carta. For a millennium, Lincoln has been the county's heart, a place where English history is written into every street, and whose rising spires are visible from much of Lincolnshire's expanse.
Down in Lincoln at the famous county show is an expedition none should be denied. I was just a lad of 18 when my dad says now's the time.
From Lincoln, I descend the Lincoln Edge, the limestone spinal column of the county, and head south. The land levels out again, flat and open. Yet, in the 1960s and 70s, the land proved fertile ground not just for crops, but for rock and roll. During the counterculture years, this region staged 3 major festivals. The first, Barbecue 67 in Spalding, even foreshadowed Woodstock, 2 years before it became the symbol of an era.
Sites where all this fabulous music action went on, it's no longer there. It's now a Sainsbury's. Who would have thought on sacred ground like that, you'd build a Sainsbury's?
The lineups of these festivals held in Spalding, Bardney, and Lincoln are difficult to believe today, though at the time many of the acts were still unknown. Crowds at these events saw early performances from Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, Cream, Genesis, the Beach Boys, and even Monty Python. So unknown were some of these acts in 1967 that organisers had to hire a local cover band just to attract crowds.
I actually knew that Jimi Hendrix was playing, and I was offered a lift by a mate on his motorbike, but my girlfriend at the time, and later to become my wife, she wasn't really up for the idea. She was a bit worried that it might crash, so I passed on that one. I wish I hadn't.
For much of history, the Lincolnshire fenlands were a vast expanse of marsh and wetland. Much of the land lies below sea level. It was regularly flooded by both the sea and the many rivers that flow through it.
The history of the Fens is the story of its drainage. Fens are very flat because they are drained marshland, and there had been attempts to drain the Fens probably forever. It was a very inhospitable part of the country, simply because most people had no idea how to live with it.
For centuries, it sustained only small, scattered and isolated communities.
It was dangerous, and it became a sort of badlands, really. People lived, people who had broken the law or whatever, ran into the Fens and lived in the Fens. The isolated communities were very isolated. There's real parallels between the Fens and the Isle of Axholme. And the people that lived there were very isolated. So there are lots of stories of inbreeding. And the local folklore used to say that they used to be called fen frogs, which got reduced to fenogs. And they used to say they had webbed feet. And of course the reality is that in humans, if you have inbreeding, you do in fact get webbing between the fingers. So there might have been a grain of truth in it.
When I used to go to the scrapyard near Spalding to get parts for my van, I thought, this is a desolate country. I'm pleased I don't live here, you know what I mean? We think we have it flat here, but you go down that way, down the Fens and all that. That was farming, do you know what I mean? Dust Bowl sort of era. It reminded me of that. I always found it, even though it was daylight, nice sunny day, I always found it a little bit sinister.
It wasn't until the mid-19th century that the Fens were finally tamed. Today, they are transformed. I found a flat, man-made landscape, laced with long, arrow-straight canals, and roads that stretch into the horizon in seemingly endless lines.
But it seems that arch government's holding the reins. I shan't work on the big mill no more.
As I cycle north of the Fens, I begin to realise that Lincolnshire is not quite as flat as I had been led to believe. The Lincolnshire Wolds are the highest point in East England, from Kent to the Humber, reaching a staggering 168 metres above sea level.
The Lincolnshire Wolds are hilly,
not sharp.
against the idea that everybody thinks Lincolnshire is flat.
The Wolds are a series of rolling hills, cloaked in a patchwork of agricultural fields, and dotted with quaint, time-worn villages, nestled in the folds and hollows of the countryside.
Lord Alfred Tennyson was one of our major 19th century poets.
He brought to life Lincolnshire's countryside.
And one could be forgiven for believing the landscape he immortalised to be an inspiration for Tolkien's Shire in The Lord of the Rings.
Reminds me when I see the Lord of the Rings, I think that probably comes to everybody's mind. It's not flat, is it, you see? And that when that hits you, it's rolling in hillside, it's like It's like Hobbit land.
Won't you stay a while? I'll admit I've always liked your style. It's been ages since I've seen your lovely.
With a newfound sense of wonder at Lincolnshire's beauty, I descend from the Wolds and head east. The land flattens out again until I arrive to the coast for the first time on this journey. Lincolnshire has over 50 miles of coastline. Despite this, its reputation rests almost entirely on a handful of small holiday towns.
Once you go from Boston all along that bit there, really until you get to Immingham, which is on the Humber, there are no big ports because the coastline didn't lend itself to it. There's no deep water.
So you've got deep water ports south and north.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, you've just got coastal
So
tourism development.
yeah. Cleethorpes used to be known as Sheffield-on-Sea.
Post-war, when people started travelling more, Lincolnshire's coastal resorts provide a large amount of the economic income for that side of the county.
The problem is that in the 1960s, mid-1960s, ordinary working people discovered air travel and Spain. And the transition from going to the British coast to going to the Spanish coast really happened within a decade.
Within a decade, yeah.
And then when package holidays came in and things like that, they went on those because they could guarantee some sunshine. And the East Coast seaside resorts really have struggled ever since.
Beyond them lies a very different world. Remote marshland as far as the eye can see, hard to reach by either land or sea. These stretches remain among the quietest and most secluded coastlines in England.
I don't think a lot of people realise that the Lincolnshire Wolds exist. I suppose everything that's on the east side of it is technically marshes or fens. And of course the marshes were responsible really for draining the Wolds. When you got heavy rainfall, it all needed to make its way out to the coast.
As my journey nears its end, I've realised that history here isn't always in the history books. At every turn, I've heard tales of creatures that linger under fields, of spirits haunting the marshes, of ghostly guides misleading travellers on the fens. Lincolnshire's folklore feels inseparable from its landscape. These stories aren't just for entertainment or scaring children. They're a way that people have tried to understand and inhabit this county, filling its stillness with fantasy. Perhaps this is part of Lincolnshire's essence, not just what is seen, but what is felt.
There's several records of folklore in the area. The Tiddymun was a sprite who lived in the moors, had a long white beard. If anything went wrong, he tended to be blamed. With a dead hand is always described as when you would cross the moor late at night, you would feel a hand coming out of the moors and it would grab you by the ankles, and I guess if you were unwary, would pull you in.
Boggarts, small men. The story goes it's about an argument between him and a farmer. The boggart wanted to have his share of the produce of the fields, so the farmer said, well, which bit of the crop do you want? Do you want it underground or overground? So the boggart said, oh, I'll have what's under the ground. So the farmer planted wheat, and the farmer took the wheat. All the boggart got was the roots. So the next year the farmer said, which bit do you want? He said, well, I'll have the stuff that goes overground. So the farmer planted potatoes, and the boggart got the green tops, which are no good, and the farmer got his potatoes. So he basically gave up and went back to his hole.
For a flag only created in 2005, the Lincolnshire flag evokes these lands with remarkable precision. This county has always been modest, less defined by boisterous pride, more shaped by soil, sky, and silence. As I've traversed this landscape, the yellow of the wheat fields, the green of the pastures, and the blue of the wide skies have been my constant companions, broken only by the rising spire of a distant church. Drawing closer, I see it surrounded by a cluster of buildings. A village or town slowly reveals itself, maintaining a scattering of life, clustered like an island in a sea of the usual colours. What I found here is a quiet identity, not absent, but unobtrusive, an undercurrent of the landscape. From the industrial towns of the north to the canal-laced fens of the south, and the oceans of wheat that lie between, Lincolnshire is a melting pot. This agricultural expanse has raised national heroes and even some villains. Identity here is not quite tangible or easily defined. A people and place shaped through their surroundings and marginal geography, yet proud of their contributions to shaping the nation. When Britain has called on Lincolnshire, it has sacrificed without question. In its fields, its factories, and in its skies. From feeding the nation to driving its industry and defending it in the wars. This county's contribution has been reticent, but immeasurable. As for me, I haven't found a definite answer, but I've brushed against the essence of Lincolnshire, and maybe that's enough. To understand a place like this, one has to move through it, spend time with it, and let it speak in its own quiet way.
There are many great adventures that the lad can undergo, be it sailing the Atlantic or a journey to the pole. But a doubt down in Lincoln at the famous county show is an expedition none should be denied. I was just a lad of 18 when me dad says now's the time to take you on a spree to where the liquor is divine, and if you dare to come back sober, you ain't no son of mine. On the day we went a drinking at the show.